If you're just joining us, welcome. We are glad you could join us for week 2, day 2 of the Smart Restart Virtual Parent Conference 2020. Our second session for the evening is Trauma-Informed Care. I am happy to introduce Sherry Vault and Keisha Esterling. Both are counseling coordinators in Dallas's Counseling Services Department. Sherry has 34 years in education and 21 years as a counseling professional. Keisha has 21 years in education and 15 years as a counseling professional. It is an honor to have both experienced counselors present on such a critical and timely subject such as trauma. So, without further ado, Keisha and Sherry, if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Hello, my name is Sherry Vault, and I'm joined here today with my co-presenter and wonderful colleague, Keisha Esterling. We're honored to be here to present to you on this session of the important topic of trauma-informed care. I hope you'll enjoy today's presentation as we gain a better understanding of what trauma is, discuss how trauma affects student behavior, academics, and social emotional well-being. Really, everything. We'll explore how we can support children suffering from trauma. I'd like to introduce this short video clip from a documentary on the effects of trauma called Resilience. The documentary discusses recent discovery on how abuse, neglect, and other stressful events experienced during childhood can have dangerous and profound biological effects on children, even into adulthood. The child may not remember, but the body does.
We all like to think of childhood as this time of joy and innocence. But, for many of us, it's just not true.
When you grow up in these type of situations, it's not something you talk about. I know I did it.
The first thing that we found is that adverse childhood experiences are common.
Kids are young, they don't know what's going on, they won't remember anyway. Well, the child may not remember, but the body remembers.
There was this incredible gee whiz effect. You mean adverse childhood experiences cause heart disease and lung disease and liver and cancer?
Exposure to trauma affects children's developing brains. The impact is on your behavior, it's on your heart, it's on your DNA. Like, how do you deal with all that?
I don't reach out because I'm not used to that.
We have a whole new body of knowledge now that could open up what we have up till now been seen as intractable, unsolvable problems.
No child should be punched or kicked. No child should be punched or kicked.
If you can get the science into the hands of the general population, they will invent very wise actions.
Do you feel like any of the interventions have been making a difference?
They made all the difference in the world.
It's there, it's possible, and a defeatist attitude is completely disconnected from what 21st century science is telling us, and we should be going after that like a bear.
Thank you. There were several themes covered in this little short clip. Today, we will learn how toxic stress can trigger hormones that wreak havoc on the brains and bodies of children, putting them at a greater risk for disease, homelessness, prison time, and even early death. While the broader impacts of poverty worsen the risk, there's no segment of society that's immune. So what is trauma? Well, trauma can be described as a result of a single event, series of events, or a chronic condition or set of circumstances that's experienced. It can affect individuals, families, groups, communities, specific cultures, and even generations. Hello, COVID-19 pandemic. Trauma can affect people of every race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, gender, psychosocial background, and geographic region. It has no boundaries. It frequently produces a sense of fear, vulnerability, and helplessness. And traumatic events are defined by the individual. So what's traumatic for one person may not be as traumatic for another. We all experience events differently. So as we look at this chart of statistics, we can see the rates of childhood trauma in the United States are very alarming. Exposure to potentially traumatic forms of violence, such as abuse, assault, or family or community violence, are particularly common. Let's walk through this graphic on rates of childhood exposure to potentially traumatic experience of violence. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, is a term used to describe all types of abuse, neglect, and other potentially traumatic experiences that occur in people under the age of 18. Adverse childhood experiences have been linked to risky health behaviors, chronic health conditions, low life potential, not performing at the highest potential, and even early death. Currently, 2 out of 3 children in the United States are exposed to violence in the past year. 50% report more than one form of victimization, and 1 in 6 report 6 or more exposures to violence. According to the ACEs study, adults also report high rates of childhood adversity. 1 in 5 adults report 3 or more adverse childhood experiences as children. So this really changes our discussion. Really, trauma-informed care shifts the focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. This is definitely a paradigm shift. Understanding what happened is the key to understanding the root cause of where behavior, especially problem behavior, is stemming from and responding in a trauma-sensitive manner. Language matters and words have power. When speaking to someone who's gone through trauma, particularly about that trauma, think carefully before speaking and speak with intention. We need to be aware that the words we choose and the tone we use and how we phrase our questions. For example, the word survivor is generally preferred and less toxic than the word victim. Now I'll turn it over to Keisha, who will take us a little deeper into the impact of trauma and provide some practical tips on how to support children who've gone through trauma.
When young children are exposed to a traumatic event, they depend on adults, especially their parents, to protect them and to make sense of the world for them. However, loss of trust in adults and new fears are common after traumatic events. Parents need to be able to listen and hear their children's concern. They also need to help them feel safe. If parents are traumatized, it is important for them to find support for themselves and to reach out to others for support for their children as well. Trauma touches our lives in many different ways: a serious accident, a physical assault, war, a natural disaster, sexual assault or abuse. Emotional and cognitive distress in childhood can shift the trajectory of brain development, changing the actual structure of the brain and the way the brain works. The emotional and relational trauma forces survival adaptations in children's brain circuitry, predisposing them to eating disorders, smoking, substance abuse, self-harm, and even violence. This greatly differs from the brain development of children who grow up in families that provide safety, security, and support. The effect of trauma on families. Relationships are developed through the emotional bond between the child and primary caregiver. It is through this relationship we learn to regulate our emotions, in other words, self-soothe, develop trust in others, freely explore our environment, understand ourselves and others, and understand that we can impact the world around us. Trauma changes families, impacting each individual family members, their relationships with each other, and overall family functioning. The parent-child relationship is vital to the child's development and recovery. Parents' protection, nurturance, and guidance speeds recovery and supports their children's coping in the face of trauma. And so as you look at this chart on the impact of trauma, remember, like Sherry said, it's not what's wrong with you, but it's what's happened to you. As we discussed earlier, repeated traumatizing experiences have a developmental issues, mental illnesses, emotional, social, and behavioral impact. When a child does not have the opportunity to process, give meaning, and learn to cope with a traumatic experience with a trusted adult, the trauma can have a devastating impact not only on the child's ability to master stage-specific development tasks at the time of the trauma, but affecting later development as well. Childhood trauma is considered a pivotal factor in the development of mental illnesses and the quality of relationships with parents and other caregivers. These children develop what's considered survivor behaviors. These behaviors help the child to survive extreme mental stress in a hostile environment, such as depression, biting, panic attacks, substance abuse, irritability, self-destructive behaviors, eating disorders, etc. So there's a quote in orange, there's a Zen saying, and if you read the poem, respect starts with the individual. So it has to start with you and then slowly moves throughout society. It starts with the parent in the home, the neighbor in your community, the minister in your church, the faculty in our schools. This light sparks from respecting oneself, and then it goes through paying forward to others around them. It brings gratitude for beauty in the person and harmony in the house. It sustains families and transforms organizations and the world. Trauma changes families as they work to survive and adapt to their circumstances and environment. The positive and supportive relationships a child has is vital to the child's development and recovery. Safe, stable, nurturing environments and relationships create protective factors buffering the adverse effects of trauma and increase resilience to life challenges. And through DISD, there are a few support services for you and your family. The school counselor is the first point of contact, providing individual and group counseling as well as guidance lessons. In addition to those services provided by your child's campus counselor, mental health services are available for more intensive individual, group, and family therapy. So as we're transitioning back to school and we're not sure quite what every family has gone through, please remember that your campus counselor as well as mental health services is available for you and your family. I'd like to share with you our contact information for counseling services. Now I'm going to open up the floor for Q&A. Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, Keisha. Okay, we have just a few questions for you. Okay, the first one. How will guidelines for virtual participation such as those given yesterday by Early Learning that require cameras on and students to be sitting up, be justified with trauma-informed teaching?
So I'm just going to kind of paraphrase the question. So how do we operate in this new virtual norm with students learning virtually with cameras on and consider trauma-informed care? So that's, again, part of our reason for coming today, not only because we've gone through a collective trauma, but also to hopefully equip parents with the tools and skills to help their children, even in this virtual setting. Counselors will also be available to work with students virtually and just helping them to navigate through and build the resilience they need to overcome those adverse childhood experiences.
Okay, thank you. Our next question and final question is, who can we go to in the district for therapy for our kids if we are having trouble in this pandemic?
So again, Keisha did a great job of just outlining the first line of contact would be your child's school counselor. And they can really provide, even virtually, a number of services to help children be successful and overcome adversity. In addition to that, there's a whole mental health department in school services through our psychological and social services department, as well as services for the entire family with our youth and family centers. So all of these will be options and available to work with students, whether it be virtually or in person when we start school.
Okay, another really good question we have is, how will the schools help virtual learning students with all the emotions they have and will experience this school year? My daughter will be in first grade.
So excellent question. So counselors not only provide counseling services to those students who are referred and who need a little extra assistance, but they also present lessons, and lessons will be presented virtually on that help deal with the social and emotional needs of students, helping them to develop skills, helping them to navigate through various situations that they'll go through, especially now in this pandemic. So our counselors are equipped and they have resources that will help students be as successful as possible during this very stressful period of time.
Thank you. One more. We have time for one more. Can we squeeze one in? Okay. Any ideas on how to ask teens who just shrug or just say nothing? Any ideas how to reach them?
So again, we understand that some behaviors, or many behaviors that we see, problematic behaviors, stem from some type of trauma. So I guess on the parent side, being as supportive and nurturing as possible, continue to try to make those connections, but also think about referring your teen to counseling so that a trained professional can kind of help figure out what the root cause is, what's going on with that student, and being able to provide supports for that particular student.
Okay, thank you. Awesome. This concludes our second session of the evening. We'd like to thank both Keisha Esterling and Sherry Vault for taking the time to present at our Smart Restart Virtual Parent Conference 2020. Thank you both.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Mm-hmm.